Welcome to the Bobby O Show. My name is Bob Opotster, and I'm happy to have a wonderful guest with us today, an author, a retired teacher, a man of substance. You all know that I've been lucky enough to be a graduate of a couple of major universities, but my proudest diploma is from Shelton High School, Shelton, Connecticut. I was born and raised in Shelton, Connecticut, and I'm always proud when someone in my hometown, who I knew in high school, is a success. And someone who is a success from Shelton High School is a fellow named Gary Scarpa, who is my guest today, who's an author of 2 books. And the second one just came out, and it is called What Are the Chances? He's also an initial member of the Shelton Hall of Fame. I must be on the waiting list still, but we'll figure that out later on. But Gary was one of the initial group of the entries into the Shelton Hall of Fame. And he's going to talk a little bit about his book. Gary, welcome aboard.
Happy to be here, Bob, and great to see you.
Oh, it's nice to see you. In fact, we did our prep show last night. It took about an hour. We spent about 6 minutes discussing the show and about 54 minutes reliving old times. Gary, give us a little background about your background.
Yeah, you were older than me. You graduated a few years before me, right?
Un contraire. The opposite. Gary, tell us a little about your background.
Well, I'm a retired teacher and guidance counselor. I spent half of my career at Shelton High School as an English teacher, and then the second half as a guidance counselor. I was sort of like Gabe Cotter. Welcome back, Cotter, because he went back to teach at his old school.
Gabe Kaplan.
There are a few of us. Gabe Kaplan was on Welcome Back, Cotter, yeah. And so there are some of us in our vintage, Bob, that came back to Shelton High School to teach, and I was among them. And while there as a young teacher, I started directing the Shelton High School Drama Club, which led me to into 43 years of directing high school kids, college kids, and adults in local theater. In 2005, my wife Fran and I, because we were partners in theater, we opened Center Stage Theater, which is still running today and doing well. Fran and I retired from Center Stage in 2019. I retired from Shelton High School in 2012, and now I'm writing in my spare time, and it's a nice thing to do for an old guy like me.
Gary, if you're going to talk about TV shows, when I think about you, I think about the movie Mr. Holland's Opus, which is a great movie. I'm sure you've all seen. I'm sure you've seen that movie, Gary, about a music director. And Gary is being very humble. He was a star in terms of directing with his wife musicals at Shelton High School. In fact, my sister Joan was a member of the chorus, I think it was, on Fiddler on the Roof. And so he was very, very well known. But unlike Mr. Holland, whose opus came out the end, Gary has become an author, and he's written a couple of books. The first book he wrote was Exit 14, which he wrote about, and it was on a show at that point in time. And now we have his second book called What Are the Chances? Gary, tell us, first of all, how it is you transitioned to becoming an author.
Yeah, well, I'll give you the Reader's Digest version, although a longer version is on my website. If you went to my bio on my website, which is just simply garyscarpa.com. But when I was a college student, I was an English major, of course, and I took a creative writing course as a sophomore, and I got hooked on writing. And in my mind, as I approached my senior year, I envisioned applying to graduate school and going for an MFA in creative writing and becoming a professional writer. But the universe changed my plan. In the summer before my senior year, I auditioned for and was cast in a summer production at our college. And I had never been in a play, but I met and fell in love with my wife at the time, and I fell in love with the theater. And so upon graduation, I decided to stick with my English major and get a job teaching so that Fran and I could get married. And then we started directing at Shelton High School, and that was a big game changer too. So the writing never happened, But when I retired in 2019, January of 2020, and not, well, February, I guess it was March of 2020, COVID hit, as we know. None of us will forget COVID. And my wife and one of my daughters, who was home at the time, said, Dad, you always wanted to write. We can't even go anywhere now, so isn't this the time? So I wrote my first novel, partly because of COVID. I would say COVID kind of spurred it on. What also spurred it was my one sibling, my brother, died the January before COVID. He died at the end of January 2020. And that first novel was partly about my relationship with him, or our relationship was part of what inspired that novel. So it was also, for me, a way of mourning his loss. So those are the steps that led me to writing.
When I was a kid, your brother was a few years older than you and much older than me. You both were to Dutch's in Aunt Sonia. And in those days, that was the big hangout. And I remember, meeting your brother, and he was always a gentleman to me. And the Scarpa family has always been a big family name in Shelton, Connecticut. There's a movie called One Hit Wonders, and it talks about having one song that you write and that's it. It's not easy to write a song, and it's not easy to write a book. And to write a second book has got to be a lot harder than even writing the first book. Tell us how you thought about doing the second book, which is the one we're talking about today. What are the chances? How did you go about thinking, well, I've written one book, now I'm going to do a second one? How did that come about?
Actually, I think the seed for the idea was planted in the course of writing the first book, because writing that first one was a very cathartic experience for me, and a very rewarding creative experience for me. I had retired from the theater, and I realized that there was still a lot of creative juice in the tank. And so it is a great way for me to use my creativity. So while I was finishing the first book, I remembered that when I was a teenager and we moved from a house, times were different. I grew up in a 4-family house that my father owned. He was the owner, resident, and landlord. And he built his dream house when I was he started building it when I was 15 and probably finished right around the time I turned 17. I think we moved in right after my 17th birthday. And I found these letters. I found this big box of letters, and they were all wrapped by month with purple ribbon around each stack. And they were love letters from him to my mother, when he was in the military during World War II. And I started to read one, and it was kind of mushy, and I was like, oh, God, Dad, please. So I didn't continue to read it, but I remembered those letters while I was writing my first book, and I thought, I would love to read every one of those letters, and there were more than 1,000 he wrote every day, and she wrote back, but I don't know what happened to her letters. And I thought, I bet you if I read those letters, it will give me the idea for a World War II romance that is fictional, but still somewhat based on my parents' courtship. And that's
so
how.
Would this sort of be a historical novel in part?
In part, it certainly is a historical novel. It starts in 1941. It's not too many months after Pearl Harbor, and the central character is sort of wondering why he hasn't enlisted yet, why he hasn't, gotten involved in the war effort. And
Here,
he eventually.
the picture of the book right now on the screen. Who's the gentleman pictured? In my left, your right.
Yeah, let me talk about that briefly. I'll try to be quick about it, but the cover was designed by a man named Mario Lampek from. Oh God, it'll come to me. You have to forgive me, Bob, as we do this program. I'm going to have 2 or 3 senior moments. He comes from Serbia, and I found him on the internet on a website that lists cover designers for books. And so I told him I wanted on the cover a girl, a soldier, a letter, maybe a city street, or an army base, and I wanted airplanes in the sky. That city street, first of all, I will tell you, is he found it. I provided him with a lot of information. That street that you're seeing there is indeed downtown Derby, where some of the story takes place. It's Main Street in Derby in perhaps the late 30s. The female is just a picture that he found and provided, but the male is really a picture of my dad. I wasn't expecting him to be on the cover. Mario first, knowing that this was a story about Italian Americans, Mario first had a full picture of a man in uniform smoking a cigarette, but I guess he thought of Italians as maybe mafioso, because the guy looked like Michael Corleone in The Godfather. He looked like he was ready to put a hit on someone. He was very handsome. The picture he found, very handsome guy. And I said, Mario, I don't think this guy represents who the male character is. So I had sent him concept pictures for different reasons, to see what the uniform looked like. I sent him pictures of because the character is becoming a pilot. I sent him pictures of pilots and so forth. So what he did, to my surprise, was take one of the pictures of my dad, and he obscured the face so you couldn't see his face or much of his face. And he put the picture in the upper left-hand corner, which really kind of touched me and made the cover much more meaningful for me. So that's one of Dad, obviously in a flight suit. And then there's another one of him with Mom. There is. That's the picture that you see on the cover, except he's obscured the face so you can't see his whole face. But I really only sent it to him because the uniform has the Air Corps cadet wings on the lapels and the sleeve. And I wanted him to see that. And I thought, is there a way that we could reproduce the uniform? I didn't expect it to be the real figure of my dad, which was awesome.
And how about a picture of your mom and dad?
Yeah, I think I sent you, there's a picture of the two of them while of course he was in the military. Yeah. So that's a nice picture of the two of them. Excellent. Yeah.
Now tell me, this is a historical novel in part. It's fiction, but it's a lot of parts of it, but it's also historical. How did you go about getting the history down right? And did you do study of the history? How did you go about deciding what historical issues to raise in your novel, knowing that World War II is the theme of as the backdrop of the book?
Yeah, I certainly did certain kinds of research. A lot of the book, because the entire story, so the people who might be interested in reading it know, the male character never goes to the front line. The war ended before his flight training ended. So this is a book about, what was it like to be in the United States while the war was going on? What was it like to meet a girl, and before you know it, you hardly know her, and you've fallen head over heels for her, and you're in the military, you're in Utah, you're in Nebraska, you're in Mississippi, you're in Texas, but you're not in Connecticut, except when you get a furlough, and which is, those times are few and far between. So, it's about the loneliness for the male character of being away from this girl that he loves, and her being about the only hope he has in his life, besides perhaps going to war, which he's ready to do because he wants to serve his country. Yeah. So as I said, the war ended. I used to ask my dad this. I said, so you didn't fight? You didn't fight the enemy? You didn't fight the Germans or the Japanese? When I was a kid, maybe, 12, 13, I thought, why didn't you fight? And he said, the war ended. And sure enough, among the letters, I wasn't expecting to find this, and I really feel it was I have a piece of history. All the flight candidates, all the cadets got a letter from a man named General B.K. Yount. And the letter basically said, and this was very close to the end of, it was very close to VE and VJ Day. It was only Well, it was it was really literally at the time of conquering Hitler. The letter said, you guys that are getting this letter are not going to finish your training. It's not happening. We're going to need you in another way. And so, I know you're going to be heartbroken and very disappointed, but you're here to serve your country, and you need to understand that you need to serve your country however we need you. And right now, we don't need more pilots because we're just fighting the Japanese. We're done in Europe.
Gary, it's very interesting how people of our generation, yours and mine, whose fathers and or uncles or relatives were in World War II, have different memories, and they have different memories, and they often don't want to share all their memories. My father, who was in the Navy, and used to tell me the gravy's in the Navy, was in Okinawa, and he was a saxophone player. And the only thing he talked about in the military was, he said, I was in Phil Rizzuto, the former baseball player for the Yankees, Hall of Famer as well. So you and the Scooter Rizzuto are both Hall of Famers. My father said, well, he was in my platoon or whatever the heck it was, and I knew Phil Rizzuto. So I was a pipsqueak 8 or 9 or 10-year-old kid. When my father took me to a Yankee game, I said, I want to go see if Phil Rizzuto knew who you were. He said, no. I said, I want to do it. So my father takes me to where the Scooter, Phil Rizzuto, was broadcasting the game. My father waves to him and says, hey, Scooter. And the Scooter says to my dad, hey, aren't you Milt, the saxophone player? My father, to the day of his death, it was the proudest moment. But it's so interesting how you have your
That's a great story.
Right? And so you have your stories, and I have
great.
mine. We all have our own stories about our parents. I want to read to you. I like that story because my father's smile was ear to ear, and as if to say, hey, you little wise ass, I guess I showed you, right? But anyway, in the back cover of your book, I love the couple of sentences you have, and I want to read them. It's really enticing. The time is 9 months after Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor. The setting is a pair of small factory towns divided by a river and nestled in a valley in America. Gee, that couldn't be Derby and Shelton, right? Connecticut.
It could be.
It could, right? Michael DeMarco is 20 years old and full of hopes and dreams. Cecilia Alberino, I guess it would be, beginning her senior year of high school, is beautiful and talented. As first-generation Italian Americans, they realize they have incredibly similar families. Both dream of breaking through the dull routine of their lives, setting themselves free of their humble family backgrounds, and doing something remarkable. When fate brings them together again and again, the two share their challenge and their love. But from afar, since Michael has enlisted and is training to fight in World War II. What does that mean to you with what's written in the back of that book?
Well, it means a lot because it's really my parents' story, I think, and some of the words that are in that description are major themes of the book. For instance, dreams and what my parents, maybe yours too, called pipe dreams is one of the major themes of the book. So, he wanted to be a pilot. He came this close, but it didn't happen. So a dream that he had didn't happen. This book is very much about being the children of Italian immigrants and trying to assimilate into American society. I knew from years of talking about their childhood and their teenage years, for my parents, that was vitally important. They wanted to be American, very American. And so that's a really important theme. And there's some scenes where there's prejudice, from like Irish to Italians and vice versa. Not racial prejudice, although there was, I'm sure, plenty of that. But there were prejudices from one nationality to another sometimes, which I think you would understand, or people in our age group would understand. That's a really important theme. So those things are really important. This book, the action of the book takes place during this World War II time. But there are about a dozen flashbacks also to the Great Depression. And my parents, the impact that the Great Depression had on them in terms of being, frugal with money, and even though they liked nice things, the American in them wanted nice things, but my father didn't want to spend he didn't want to spend $12 on an appetizer like panna cotta in an Italian restaurant when he could make it for $1 at home. So this depression time when they grew up is really an important factor in the book as well. So
I would agree
those
with you.
things are really key.
I would agree with that. Depression being important. My grandfather and my father owned a bakery business for 57 years in Shelton. Actually, it started in Durham,
Yes.
then it came to Shelton. And the story about the depression that was told over and over and over to me was because they were a bakery, they were able to get flour. Whatever the government was doing was they got flour. And my grandpa especially was making bread with the flour given and the yeast given by the government. And they would give out free bread to people in the Depression. And when I finally grew up, or when I was a kid in high school and in grade school, people would tell me about, your grandpa Max in the Depression. He would give us free food and we never forgot. So the things you're talking about, Gary, that led you to your book, that impacted your book, are common themes that we all see, but in different family units.
Yeah, and could I just comment on that bread story you just told, because I didn't fully answer an earlier question, which was about research, and I certainly I was just getting to. I had to research Harry Truman's speech when the war was won in Europe. His speech when the bomb was dropped in Nagasaki. Those things are an important part of the book. But there were smaller details like rationing, and so I had a scene where one character scolds another in their home for putting too much sugar in her tea. Or I didn't have her scold her, actually. And then my daughter, Mia, who serves as my editor, said, Dad, we have to look at rationing and say, could she throw 2 heaping teaspoons of sugar in her tea? And so, I considered that. I did a little research about it. And Mia said, could they go to Vanetti's in Derby and buy an ice cream sundae? And as best as I could tell from my research, yes, they could. They could go to Vanetti's and buy an ice cream sundae. It was during the war years, but they themselves were rationed a certain amount of things like sugar. So when the character throws these 2 heaping teaspoons in, another character reprimands her and says, hey, what are you doing? Like, Miss Sugar, sarcastically, you shouldn't be using that much sugar. And so there are little details like that about those years that as an author, you want to get accurate. You want to make sure somebody who knows is reading it and says, wait a minute, they would have been rationed this particular thing, and that wouldn't have been so. And so I found that those are the kinds of things I was trying to research. I was trying to research, what did a meal cost at Woolworth's in Derby? If you sat down to lunch, what did it cost? And so I was like scanning the internet for that kind of information, and I hope I got it right. I think I got it, well enough so that it wouldn't raise a red flag for anyone who's maybe 85 or 90 years old and is reading this book, or anyone who's a real history wizard and knows a lot about that.
And by the way, for those who don't know it, Vanetti's was a real, quote, malt shop, unquote, that was in the Valley. And there was actually one in Derby and one in Ansonia, Connecticut. And when I was a little kid, if my father or mother took me to get an egg cream at Vanetti's, it was a big deal. And those are little things. That's why, I'm Shelton born and Shelton bred. And when I die, I'll be Shelton dead. And, we all go back to our roots, which ties me. We have about 3 or 4 minutes left. But you mentioned something about your father's generation and how different immigrants were fighting the war for America. And if you go back to World War II in the 1940s, many, many, many people who fought shoulder to shoulder for the American side had parents who were born in foreign countries. the Irish coming over in the 1890s and 1900s, the Italians and whatever. And Shelton was a pretty heavily Italian and Polish communities were big in Shelton and Derby, but people had different, diversities in the Shelton. The Italians might be with the Italians and the Polish with the Polish. But when it came to fighting for our country, it was all together. And I think it's a great lesson for today's generation, 2024, where we have such diversity and disputes about, we don't have respect for the other side's opinion. And maybe we do need some kick in the pants to, and we don't want it to be a world war, God forbid, but we really have to understand that we are in this all together and that our fathers and uncles, there was one of my mother's best friends, the Savitsky house in Shelton. That's a famous name in Shelton. And I remember my mother's best friend, Edie, lost a brother and always hit me in Pearl Harbor. He was on, I guess it was the Arizona, I think is the ship that sunk. And I'll never forget that her 18, 19, 20-year-old brother, they used to always talk about how he died in the war. Your book is very timely. I have read parts of the book. I've been reading other things, but I'm going to finish the book myself. We have about 2 minutes left. I'd like you to comment real briefly, if you might. First of all, if someone wants to read more about you, very slowly, give us your website that people can go to find out more about Gary Scarpa, the author, the humanitarian, the retired teacher.
Yeah, so to find out about what I've written and what I'm writing now, my website is my name, Gary, Gary, Scarpa, SCARPA.com, GaryScarpa.com. And I'm currently finishing the first draft of my next book, which I believe is going to be called Still Life. And it takes place in the very late 60s and early 70s. And it's about a road trip. And I think it's a lot of fun if you like nostalgia from the 60s. And that I hope to publish before the summer. I think it's realistic to think it'll be out before the summer. And then after that, I hope to write a book about theater, because that was 43 years of my life.
And I bet you your final book will be a biography about the Bobby O. This has been
it will be about the famous Bobby O.
The Bobby O. And maybe someday I'll get into the Hall of Fame, at least in my own house. Remember, in any event, it's an end of a great show. And Gary, I'm sure we enjoyed it. You and I did. I don't know if the people will enjoy our stories about our fathers and our families and whatever. You and I could talk hours on these topics. And I look forward to reading the book in its entirety. This has been Bob Potsner on The Bobby O Show with the one and only, the famous Gary Scarpa. Shalom.
Thanks, Bob. Great being here.